Hello, my name is John Uriarte. I'm the curator of digital programs at the Photographers Gallery in London. If you are returning from last time, thank you for joining us today again. If you are new, you are very welcome. Screenwalks is a project created by Photomuseum Winterthur and the Photographers Gallery. It's a fortnightly series of live stream events with artists and researchers who take us on exploration of the photographic and its digital and network form. All of the artists and researchers in the Screenwalks work with ideas that we find essential in advancing the discourse on photography's changing role and how these affect the work of artists, photographers, curators, as well as viewers. The stream will last a little longer than an hour. For those of you on Zoom, your microphone should be muted already. If not, go ahead and please mute them now. And please feel free to write messages in the public chat or send them privately to Marco or to me if you have any questions throughout the stream. The video is being recorded and will be archived, so please do not activate your camera if you don't want to be recorded. If you have missed a previous Screenwalk and would like to see what happened, please do check our archive on screenwalks.com or our YouTube or Twitch channels.
And hello from my side too. My name is Marco De Mutis. I'm the digital curator at Photomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. Curatorial practices in photography institutions have been struggling with the transformations of the image in the wake of its digital turn and its circulatory powers. Not only the volumes of these images, but their properties are and were difficult to fully grasp using the lens of traditional photography and photography theory. Digital and online images have often been perceived and narrated as ephemeral and immaterial, compared to the printed, fixed, stable photograph. Networked images are commonly seen as a fistful of pixels with a sprinkle of magic flying freely across the world, unconstrained by the laws of physics. Yet, as we'll see today, networked images are part of a very material infrastructure, and their circulation is regulated, even slowed down or blocked, according to the same boundaries and borders we encounter in our own movements. Today, we're lucky to be joined by researcher and curator Gaia Tedone in her journey chasing images on and off the screen, a journey that took her halfway across the world and back, and where her own trajectories intersected with those of the same images she researched, through their censorship, their commodification, but also their alternative forms of distribution. Unraveling a series of unequal accesses and asymmetric circulations, Gaia will show how, in the context of network images, curating might actually mean smuggling, infiltrating, or redistributing, intended as a political process that lays bare the hidden infrastructure and the power dynamics of image circulation. Gaia Tedone is a curator and researcher with an expansive interest in the technologies and apparatuses of image formation. She completed her PhD at the Center for the Study of the Network Image in 2019 at London South Bank University, with a practice-based research entitled Curating the Network Image, Circulation, Commodification, Computation. Around this topic, she writes, teaches, and curates. Currently, she's working on a research project titled Curating Photography in the Network Image Economy at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts, where she investigates post-photography curating and algorithmic visual culture. Thank you, Gaia. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Marco, for the kind introduction, and welcome to all. It's nice to see so many friendly faces before I share my screen. And just a word to begin with, I would like to ask the people who are watching if they can write in the chat which geographical location they are watching from, the country and city possibly. Thank you very much. Okay. So tonight, I will tell you a story that involves some space-time compression across different geographies. And the story begins in London in January 2016 following the trace of an image of a t-shirt, and then it follows to Havana in Cuba in January 2018. And from there, there is a little detour to Mexico City, sometimes around 2019. And the final destination is to be determined tonight, I hope. So, Chapter 1, London. So the story begins in London in January 2016. At the time, I was living in the neighborhood of Clapham North, south of the river. Just by the tube station, there was an interesting charity shop that was run by an Italian lady called Anna that would sell all sorts of interesting items, such as crystals, incense, as well as second-hand clothes. And I would go there every time I would feel like speaking my own language, and often I would leave the shop without buying a thing. One afternoon, while chatting with Anna, I stumbled upon an H&M t-shirt pattern with the statement, "This image is not available in your country." At the time, I was 6 months into my research at the Center for the Study of the Network Image. And I was looking for an image to set off the practice-based element of my research. More specifically, I was looking for an image with an element of reflexivity that could open up broader reflections about conditions of image search and circulation within the network culture. Ironically, I was confronted with a very specific and concrete object, and with a network image that would evoke such conditions of circulation by way of negating them. Historically, the relationship between photography and fashion goes back a long way. And I traced this entanglement back to John Berger's famous essay about August Sander's work from 1980, and which concerns also issues of class, gender, and label. So I asked myself, what can this t-shirt tell us of the patterns of circulation and distribution and repetition of the network image? The t-shirt was produced in Bangladesh in 2014, and unfortunately, around the time I began my research, there was a major fire in one of H&M factory. And this is a video I was able to track as I began working on this project. When I went back home, I took a photograph of the t-shirt and posted it on Facebook. And I noticed it did trigger various comments and reaction. At the same time, I took the physical t-shirt and hung it on the wall of my kitchen, treating it as a photograph that needed a frame. At that point, I realized that I was interested in this t-shirt as a material object, a commodity, as well as a digital image, as well as an aesthetic object in its own right. So I began to follow two specific tracks of investigation, tracing first the physical object of the t-shirt. And for this, my first step was actually to get in touch with H&M customer service, as you will hear.
Thank you for waiting. We are doing our best to help you shortly.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm calling to inquire about a specific image that I saw on the US online store. And I was just wondering if you have any of these t-shirt actually left in stock in the UK.
Okay, do you have a number for the item?
Yes, so it's 36-1487. Yeah.
It's got a picture and it says here, this image is not available in your country. Is that the actual picture or is it just a message that it's telling me?
That's the actual t-shirt, right?
Is that what it is? I've not seen this t-shirt before. It actually says this image is not available. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's have a look then. It's an online exclusive, so you can only get it online, and there's the number that I need, and there's the other number that I need. So let's go to our website and see if we sell it, which I hope we do. No product found.
Yeah, that's why I'm calling, because I went through this sort of step myself and I couldn't find it. So I then chatted online with the US store and they told me it's sold out there, but to check with you whether maybe you've got some left over in stock or...
Yeah, it looks like we never even sold it.
Oh, okay. So where do you think...
This t-shirt is not available in my country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, how do you... I mean, do you think I can still get hold of it somewhere in the world, or it's just a secondary market now?
Yeah, it looks like it was never available here, so it doesn't look like we have an official way of getting hold of it ourselves. So I can only hope that somebody returns one back to the American market.
I see.
Customers.
So basically, there are no H&Ms in the world, you reckon, where I can still buy it? Or is there a way to verify that?
There isn't a way to verify that, unfortunately. I have no way to even check the stock for American market, so I can't check their stock levels or any other market. I can only check the UK ones, you see. We don't have a system for us to check the other markets. I can only check this item up because it uses the same sort of codes as our products, and that's the only way that I was able to find it. But it doesn't come up on our website at all.
I see. Okay, so basically the t-shirt is not available in this country, right?
It's not, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
So indeed, the t-shirt was not available in my country as well as in many other countries. And this was somehow darkly ironic, also considering the text patterned on his fabric. In other conversation, I also tried to inquire about who was the designer of this specific T-shirt, but I couldn't get any answer from H&M. In fact, and here I quote, they told me, we work with about 900 suppliers and 1,900 factories. Unfortunately, we will not be able to tell you the designer of that specific shirt. It is designed by H&M. So the text pattern on the T-shirt indeed evoke the removal of content from the web for copyright and censorship reason. And so the kind of text in a sort of perverse way flirted with the idea of geo-blocking as a kind of cultural and market regulation. And so together with tracing the physical object of the T-shirt, I started as well to trace the digital image online. And I noticed that the image of the T-shirt had a widescreen culture, as it has been posted and reposted in various platforms, such as Pinterest, as well as there were various images and selfies produced by users I could trace. And the image was also available in amateur fashion blogs, as well as more idiotic image boards where people would comment on the text itself. Like in this case, this is a picture taken by the website called themetapicture.com. How many of these images are still traceable today is a significant question in itself, which more generally pertain to the availability of online content. So perhaps we can take a look and see what is the state of the art today. So let's go on Instagram and follow the hashtag "this image is not available in your country." As you can see, yeah, there are a number of selfies, portraits. This is an image I particularly like that suggests the possibility of this text ending up in a gallery eventually, as well as, again, this is my own T-shirt. And you can see various posts by a number of users in different locations. And this is the state of Google search image just a week ago. So let's see what we can find today. So again, you are able to see various iterations of this T-shirt, some of which are clearly synthetic image. Other have a sort of interesting twist. This, for instance, is a reference to European Union. And again, here you can find images of my own work appearing in this context, as well as this specific peak that I traced a few years back. And so, oh, this is again the T-shirt that is not available. And so we can go on and on. And at the time of my investigation, back in 2016, this process of tracing was really useful to make me wonder about the status of the network image itself. So what was I looking at back then? Where and what was the image that was supposedly evoked by this T-shirt? Was it, could this image be located in the selfie and portraits anticipated by H&M visually savvy branding strategy? Or was the image to be found in the paths of censorship, in the visible path of circulation of the image itself? Or again, was the image the text in its own terms. So in this case, for instance, I was able to identify the text as a kind of network image in its own. And here it was reproduced on the flyer of an Amnesty International campaign for the right to protest. But simultaneously, the text appears as a graphics in its own terms in this online shop called Society 6. So here you can see the graphic could be reprinted on several other clothing items, as well as a mug, a bag, and various items of merchandise. And what I found particularly interesting in this website, and we can take a look at it now, is that they make reference to the graphic as artwork and to the designer as artist, and also to the sale agent that contribute to the sharing of these objects and images as curator. So according to the website Society 6, in order to become a curator, one simply need to sign up. So back here, there is a second stage of my research that I undertook back in 2016 that involved myself physically attending to the main store of H&M in London, Oxford Circus. At the time, I noticed the presence of this photo automat that was produced by H&M together with the company The Flashback. And I was intrigued by its retro aesthetic, but also by its touch screen and sort of network quality. So in a way, it was an object that would appeal to all lovers of photography, from the vintage one to selfie culture, basically. I decided then to walk in there with my H&M t-shirt and to take a number of self-portraits. What I did not know is that all of them would come up with the H&M logo on them. So here I was completely branded. I became a product of the H&M brand without realizing or without previous knowledge. So in my attempt of curating this image of an H&M t-shirt, I ended up being curated myself by H&M. Of course, there was a disclaimer at the entrance of the photo automat, whereby people were informed that the moment they would walk in, some of their data and image would become sort of property of H&M. Nevertheless, I decided to go along with the process and sent the newly produced photo strips to my email address and decided to share them on social media. When I shared them on Facebook, they triggered some confused reaction with one of my friends asking if I had become a model for H&M. Whereas when I shared them on Twitter, they were immediately retweeted by someone from H&M or the Flashback. At that point, I realized I was really walking a slippery line. So I decided to pause the process of my research and reflect. In order to fully complete the circle of the project, I bought an H&M t-shirt from the line Conscious, 100% organic cotton, and print on it the photo strips that emerge from the Flashback photo automat. And I presented this project in several occasions in academic settings and workshops, always wearing my newly customized H&M shirt. So overall, the circulation of the image beyond the physical object of the t-shirt revealed during this project that the network image is an image whose currency and value can be determined by the means of the circulatory patterns it creates across various contexts of reception and various users. And the tracing of these patterns expose how the online environment mimics a network economy that gives the illusion of smooth global transaction, but is in fact permeated by economic and geographic boundaries. It also pointed to the role of technology in restricting access to images and content to users, and creating this kind of national cyberspace, customizing content on the base on certain idea about territorial market. In other words, it pointed to the complicity of technology with a certain dark side of online curation, in the sense of the act of filtering and blocking the access and circulation of goods, images, and content. So this is the end of the first chapter. Now we are going to travel from London to Cuba. So chapter 2, Cuba. In January 2018, I then put my t-shirt in a suitcase and traveled with a friend to Cuba. This is the promotional video from the company we took to fly over there, which is a very stereotypical sort of portrait of Cuba that appeals to, sort of a tourist gaze, which of course was very different from the reality I encountered. And so once in Cuba, I took a number of pictures myself. And this, for instance, is the Palacio Central de la Computación in La Habana. And I was particularly paying attention to this kind of sign that would sort of speak of access to the internet there. Of course, I, as a tourist and as a researcher traveling there, I tried myself to connect to the internet using the Nota cards, which are this card you see here, that you can purchase in one of the Wi-Fi parks around La Habana and in other cities across the island, that allow user, tourists and citizens to connect to the internet. And in spite of the difficulties of internet connection during this trip, I met with quite a few remarkable people, one of which was Cuban artist Nestor Siré, who introduced me to the Cuban weekly package, which is this hard disk of 1 terabyte you see in this image. So I will tell you a little bit more about this project. Well, more than project, this network of distribution. So the Cuban weekly package gained popularity around 2014, but actually has its root in terms of a mechanism of distribution back in the 80s. And so it's an hard disk that contains a terabyte of information of media content mainly, and is considered a sort of shared good, a shared resource for Cubans, also as a kind of counterpoint to the difficulties they're facing in access media content and information. And the paquete as an internal structure has got different folders with different information inside. but also shows a kind of curatorial intelligence, in the sense that the content is selected at the ends of illegal businesses called matrices. But the concept of piracy in Cuba is, as Nestor Sire quite clearly states when talking about the project, is quite gray, in the sense that piracy is something that is acknowledged and performed by the state itself. So the way it works is that Cubans actually sign up to become members of the paquete, and they receive it basically delivered at home on a weekly basis. And actually, when I met Nestor in his studio, the packet had just arrived, and I would see few people popping in his apartment to copy the content. And what you actually see in this video are sub-matrices that copy various versions of the paquete for various users. So getting acquainted with the context of Cuba and with the project of the paquete, I realized that my t-shirt had landed in quite an interesting place. What is also quite fascinating about this phenomenon of the paquete is that not just has sort of form and format through the hard disk, but it's got also another version through these street shops. And one here you can see an example of one of them, where actually people can go physically with their memory stick, curate their own selection of media content, which exactly replicates the structure of the paquete, and bring it home with them. So within this structure, Nestor actually curates what is called the art folder, the art section, which is a project around which most of his practice has developed, as well as a number of collaboration with other people, especially with the American artist Julia Waste. Basically, the art section of the paquete can be understood as a sort of repository of information for the local community of artists in terms of what's going on as far as open calls and call to events are concerned, but as well as other information such as books, fanzines, and other sorts of inspiration. Also within the art section, Nestor curates a showcase of artistic and curatorial projects that sort of fit in the context. And so the folder, as I was saying, mimics the general law of the paquete, so it cannot really showcase content which is explicitly political or pornographic. However, being art, a lot of projects work in a sort of gray area. And it does take up 5 gigabytes of the hard disk, and is released on a monthly basis, as opposed to the paquete, which is circulating on a weekly basis. So I decided to leave my t-shirt physically in Cuba at the hands of the very interesting people I met. And in exchange, I brought another t-shirt to London, which is still with me today. So the opportunity to sort of collaborate with Nestor came shortly after, as he asked me to sort of introduce and showcase the kind of research I've been doing around my H&M t-shirt in the R folder of the paquete. So I wrote a text as well as put together a selection of images. And the principle of my project was quite simple, although a little bit convoluted at the same time, in the sense that I wanted to activate a participatory project, sort of really trying to connect with the many users of the paquete. So I posed the question, which image is not available in your country? And I asked to specifically reflect around these issues of inaccessibility of content, and to send like some material, an image that would sort of comment about this situation. For this purpose, first of all, I would like to show you a little bit how the project function within the paquete itself. So here you see the structure of the different section and different edition of a paquete. And my project was showcased inside, and this is a video that made that Nestor made a screen record of to give an idea of how it all fitted together. So we can leave this. And also, so for the purpose of this project, Nestor and I even thought about creating a specific Gmail address called not available in my country @gmail.com. However, we did not receive any material. So in that sense, my proposition, my intervention can be considered a failure. It did not quite work. It did not activate any response from the local audience. And this was probably due to the lack of access to the internet, the difficulty of even writing an email sometimes, and also perhaps my distance, the fact that I was not really there to engage with people. And this is a kind of project that perhaps would have required a deeper degree of involvement. However, as most long distance relationship and collaboration, Nestor and I kept talking throughout the years, thinking of ways of reactivating this collaboration. And we even considered the possibility of gifting to the Cuban user of the paquete some incentive, in order to trigger their participation, perhaps some T-shirt. With another friend I met during the same trip, we even considered the possibility of creating a brand of T-shirt dedicated to, conscious slogans about technology. But again, life and academia got into the way. And so this project sort of was waiting to be reactivated. I must say, though, that the paquete, especially Julia and Nestor's project, on the contrary, has traveled extensively across the world. So here are some installation view of the project. Here, the Hwangju Biennial. Here's the Queen's Museum in New York. Here is the Havana Biennial with my intervention inside as well. What is very interesting when this project travels as a whole is that in each country it travels to, it encounters a different set of problems in relation to copyright and censorship that of course reflect more generally the relationship that the Cuba has with the hosting country. But as I was mentioning earlier, we were very keen to keep collaborating with Nestor, and the opportunity of performing this screen walk, so we're at chapter 3, which is tonight's event, serves specifically as a great trigger to get back in touch with my Cuban collaborators. And so I talked to Nestor a couple of weeks ago, and the first thing I found out was actually that my physical t-shirt, which I left in the hands of a Cuban curator, had actually fled to Mexico City. So it was no longer there. And so here again, my tragic comic attempt to trace this t-shirt. And so the name of the curator is Eric Gonzalez Leon, and he was in Mexico City, and he went there to study, and he was actually stuck there for the COVID pandemic. On the other hand, Nestor Sierra was in Cuba as well, being stuck for the COVID pandemic and not really sure whether he would be able to travel to Europe anytime soon. And so Nestor also mentioned that in light of what's going on at the moment, Cuban users are seeking, of the Paquete in general, are seeking like to engage with the internet a bit more, especially in relation to the latest events. So we really decided to take this opportunity to revive our collaboration and to revitalize the project. Although some problems remain the same. So it's really hard to plan even a Skype meeting with someone working in Cuba, let alone a live participation to a Zoom event. So with Nestor, we really thought about, how to circumnavigate this condition, and we engaged in long conversation. And I asked him to perhaps, go back to my original question, which was, which image is not available in your country, to take it in a bit of a broader sense in terms of, the difficulties that one has to perform like daily tasks in Cuba. So Nestor has sent me screenshots of many of the sites that are actually blocked and that he cannot access. So here you see a small selection. And more importantly, he has also produced a short video, which I'm going to show you right now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nestor Sire. I am a Cuban artist, and I want to say thank you to Gaia for inviting me for participate in this presentation. We are making a small video about the history in relation with the internet in Cuba, and also we are making an experiment about which imaging is not available in Cuba. Starting in 2015, public internet services were opened in Cuba in Wi-Fi Park, and was not until the end of 2018 that Cubans had access to the internet using mobile data. Despite the high cost of the service and the slow connection, having this service changed the social dynamic in Cuba. Today, all the offline phenomena previous to the internet era are converging with a gradual learning of what it can offer. But the truth is that my mom thinks that Facebook is internet, and this is a huge problem that we'll hope we can fix in the next years. The images are not available in Cuba, I believe, are the result of the internet censorship, both by the United States embargo on Cuba and in a political sense by the Cuban government itself. In Cuba, when websites are censored by the Cuban government, they never open, not indications coming up, That is why for this project I use Omni, with which I test the condition of the web. Most of these websites are news sites or blogged by independent journalists, with a critical view that is opposite to the ideology of the Cuban government. However, it is possible to access them with the use of VPN, and this is a kind of common knowledge for the Cuban people. On the other hand, there are many surveys and websites blocked from outside Cuba. Many of these websites are being based in the United States and have been blocked by the Cuban embargo law. A good example is what is happening precisely with the service of Omni project. The website is blocked from Cuba, but at the same time, Apple Store is blocked from outside Cuba. What imagine is not available in Cuba, it can be ironic and in the same time contradictory. But the real truth is that the Cuban people are blocked on both sides.
So I want to thank you, Nestor, for this video. And I also want to conclude by saying that, this collaboration is ongoing, and we're really trying to consider what the next step of the project is, and perhaps it is to produce a brand of t-shirt with non-available images. So I'm just going to try to see if Nestor is available. It's typing, good. Oh, nice. Nice screenshot. So, shall we open up the floor to some questions or comments, maybe while we are still here online with Nestor, if someone wants to, take the opportunity to ask some questions specifically about the Cuban situation or the great project El Paquete in the art section.
I also just want to mention, thanks Guy and thanks Nestor, in a moment of great internet streaming television, we also have Julia in Zoom, who maybe you
really?
Chat, so
fantastic, welcome. So please both.
Through different sources. But we already have a question from Andrew that maybe we can start with while the others are warming up. So
sure.
I'm gonna read it. If the image of the t-shirt is a metaphor for the network image, what is the network image and where is it?
Well, this is a typical Andrew question, isn't it?
You already know which Andrew it is.
Well, I think the network image, in my opinion, and in what I've learned through this project, is precisely like an evolving and morphing sort of construct. So it's really hard to pin down what an image is. And as Marco also sort of emphasizing at the beginning of the presentation, the network image doesn't only travel online, it goes on and off the screen. And I think this was an interesting case to be involved on, to also deal with this kind of relationship. But for what emerged from my research, clearly, I would say that the network image is not like an entity in itself, it's just a multiplicity of images, and they can be traced across these sort of patterns of circulation, some of which are more visible, others are actually almost negative spaces. One needs to really dig in to kind of try to map in the first place. So yeah, thank you for the question. Nestor, do you have any question?
In the meantime, Joanna asks, what would you say are the challenges and or the strengths of this emergent methodology in curatorial practice?
I think there are a number of challenges indeed. First of all, there is an increasingly hybridization in terms of, what is the task of the curator. And so the role of the curator becomes enmeshed with other roles of the researcher, collector, producer of t-shirt eventually, or producer of images, as well as, takes up a little bit more of an authorial sort of space. But I think what is really interesting, and I can refer back to the example of the website Society 6, is how also the language of curatorial practice has been sort of absorbed by the logic of the commercial web, in the sense that curating and curation is a word, is an activity that means many different things at this time. So I do believe the task of the curators who's actually interested in explore this practice within the context of the network culture is precisely to be aware of this conflict of definition and this conflict of interpretation of what we mean by curator, and also like the kind of agents that are involved in the process of curation, which are not only humans, but also bots and software and platform. And to some extent, this screen walk was also an experiment with Nestor in network curation across distant geographies, across different technologies. And so I think we're moving away, from what I understand, we're moving away from the idea of the curator as a kind of single professional, but in sort of, I propose to place it within a much wider network of other agents, as I hope this presentation sort of showed. So let's see what Nestor says. Another Q&A, essentially have more participation. Okay, yeah, we might think to, in a way, revitalize the project there, but we're still discussing, the best strategy on how to do so. So perhaps, shall I stop sharing my screen, Marco and John?
Up to you. I think, if you want to leave it on, that's actually
okay.
For having
okay, I'm happy
for Nestor to jump in if he sees that.
Okay, that's fine. I'm more than happy.
And in the meantime, I'm just gonna read some more comments also for the people in the live stream who cannot read them. Jeff is asking, surely what is emphasized is that the image is data and the project points to its circulation, exchange, and how it is served at an infrastructural level. And the job of the curator is to work with this, not so much content, but infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, this is a very good comment. Thank you. And yeah, going back also to the question that was posed by Andrew at the beginning, yeah, what is the network image? Where is it? I mean, definitely, this is also a way to answer that question. It is data. So clearly what we're looking at is how this data circulates across different contexts and how like the interface of the image when landing in so many different contexts acquire like different meanings and also create different patterns of aesthetics. But certainly this is all to do with the fact that the network image is computation. So the possibility of circulating, of being reproduced and manipulated is what creates creates the network image in itself.
And I think maybe just before we ask some other question, I had maybe also a follow-up question based. I think, you know, from the curatorial perspective, also both Joy and I think that the idea of curating also what it means for the institutions, right? Like how does the institution then connect to all of these issues? And especially when we're talking about all of these problems of censorship or other sort of like, you talked about, I think you said something like a dark pattern that regulates the circulation of these images and this commodification. So at the level also of institution, how do we facilitate this? You know, like many of, or at least our institutions are still dealing with formats like exhibitions that struggle. That's what I was also hinting a bit in my introduction. We're struggling to deal with the implication of this network image. And I know you've worked a little bit also in other platforms and experimenting a lot with this idea of curating by infiltrating subversively on, I think, eBay, right? So maybe there's something there that you could.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is an element of smuggling and infiltrating in existing infrastructure, which makes the curatorial action or process actually invisible at the end. So I totally understand these difficulties of introducing this kind of practice under a sort of institutional agenda, because the way I've approached the space of the web, when I began to treat it as a kind of my curatorial arena, was specifically, you know, to sort of give away all my preconceived idea of what a curator does and should do or is, to actually really delve into you know, those other interpretation of the curatorial activity that are already out there, but simply are not so much being taken into account within the art world, or at least not enough, in my opinion. But it is true that in practical terms, at least what I've been doing so far has been, can be characterized as quite invisible sort of intervention. As you mentioned, I did work on eBay, on the platform, within the context of the project Exchange, curated by Maria Laura Ghidini and Rebecca Modrak. And in occasion of that project, I really tried to understand who was the curator of the platform, and ultimately it became evident to me that it was the search algorithm. And so our other project developed around this. So certainly it is a kind of hard practice to pin down, and possibly, you know, quite a challenge still to frame it within an institutional setting. But I think there is a lot, you know, a lot that can be done as well. So I think we are in a good moment of transition and experimenting with formats. So yeah.
And going back to the ideas of accessibility and censorship, there's another question from Rebecca. She says that it's interesting to take these ideas of access and censorship, apply to a country like Cuba, and also apply them to an individual. So she says, I'm curious about how you feel about the wearer, about the people who, like the person who wears the t-shirt, I guess. Is it possible to interpret the country as the wearer's body, and that the country changes according to the wearer's who speaks this sentence by wearing the shirt?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was something that fascinated me a lot with this specific visual object that was specifically, in relation to this kind of tactile element, the fact that it was actually a shirt that people would wear across many different places. So, to me, it was almost an interesting point of reflection to think how, these patterns of circulation, of this form of capitalism as well, which is permeated by circulation, appropriation, and those kind of logics, it's quite tactile as well. So it really is close to the skin to some extent. So I think, there is definitely an interesting point there, an interesting comment. Thank you.
And Guido is asking, if you take a wild guess, where do you think the t-shirt designer is from? And I'm also thinking, like, could it be that it wasn't made by a human?
The t-shirt wasn't made by a human?
Meaning that the message wasn't taken by a human, but it was maybe taken by a bot?
Yeah, I mean, I guess all is possible. What is clear, and it was really hard to, locate the authorship of the t-shirt and of the text pattern on the t-shirt. So, it did exist in its own terms on the web. So I can't quite tell you, I don't have a specific view on, where the origin of the text comes from, but I do think it's plausible that, it was just, produced mechanically, and that's it.
Andrew has a lot of questions, but just to be fair, I'm gonna wait a little bit and let someone else speak before we get to those. Santiago is asking, he's wondering about the political change implications of curatorial process. Has H&M made any comment on your project? What political effects do you think your project has?
Well, we're not quite sure whether H&M is watching us or not.
We hope so, and we welcome them in the chat.
But for sure, I did not have any direct contact with H&M, apart from those I share with you tonight. So I did not reach back to tell them about my research. I do know, especially since the fires of 2016, there's been a lot of work that H&M has put into trying to clean its image and invest into those programs of conscious and sustainable fashion. And in terms of the political side of curation and curating that I'm trying to articulate here, I think this is a really interesting and thought-provoking point. Thank you. And for me, it has to do about more broadly regimes of visibility and invisibility, and perhaps the task of the curator at this point is really to put a spotlight towards those mechanisms that are obscure yet deeply permeate our life under current condition of circulation-based capitalism or data capitalism, platform capitalism, if we want to call it. So I think there is a lot of work, in terms of rethinking the political sort of agency of curating nowadays that can be done.
And I think this actually connects quite well to a question by Andrew who's asking, how does curating online engage with duration? Is it endless, circular, and multiple?
I would say, all of them. So far, in my experience, and this goes back to, the difficulties I was trying to articulate before. Is it something that is really hard to, you know, confine, you know, or formalize in a kind of unique way. And what I like about this project that I share with you tonight is precisely this dimension, in a sense, the fact that the opportunity to perform this screen work was an excellent occasion to rethink of my collaboration with Nestor within this framework, and, you know, to actually reactivate the conversation, and also to use the technology that, you know, we had at our disposal, that, you know, we could access at both hands of the digital divide, so to speak. Yeah, I do think it's an iterative process, and I also do believe in collaboration a lot. And I think what we are also seeing today, especially in this moment of confinement, you know, through these kind of formats like the screen walk, is also the potential of connecting audiences across various geographies with all the due difficulties. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's the same as real life, by no means, but there is certainly like the potential for you know, a wider engagement in terms of you know, different point of views, and create different networks across developed from different projects.
I don't know if
we have a comment from Nestor coming in from WhatsApp. This is very exciting.
Yeah, it is quite networked.
I think the political content of the project is in search of what content is available, and especially the question of what content and why it is blocked, censored. Yes, indeed. Does anyone has any questions specifically for Nestor? Oh, sorry.
While we wait, if anyone has a question directly for Nestor, maybe a fast and easy one is if the English text was translated to any other languages and printed on a t-shirt.
The text, this image is not available in your country. I did find it in Russian, and I did find that image online, but not by H&M. I do think because of the screen culture of this t-shirt and its kind of behavior as a sort of meme somehow, there were various appropriation and reappropriation of both the t-shirt and the text. So I did look around and also thought about you know, the question of language and whether I could find other examples. And indeed, I did find an image of the t-shirt with the text in Russian. But I think from, you know, the point of view of H&M, with its focus on the American market, no, clearly it was only made in English.
More from Jeff. This question is not available in your country. You think after the pandemic, global biennials will be distributing their work on t-shirts via H&M? Because the tote bag are already standard, he says. How does globalization, marketing, and art come together? Yeah,
this is an excellent comment and question. Well, I do think, yeah, the pandemic has sort of emphasized certain dynamics that were already present, but on the other hand, I do see that certain logic of the art world have not really changed. For instance, the logic of an art fair with a VIP section and all of that has been just translated from the offline to the online world. So I think it's more, it's a question which are words, plural, we're talking about, and most of all the relationship between them and the network culture. So I think, there is, probably we're not far from the scenario that Jeff has described, but I think there is still room for sort of critical practices in this space as well. Or maybe also using the same, strategies perhaps, but, trying to sort of communicate and convey other kind of messages.
We have a question for Nestor now too, from Val, asking if the Paquete project is technically legal, if he had to talk to local authorities, or is it more like an unspoken contract that no one will prosecute him because of piracy being so semi-institutionalized in Cuba?
Is he still there?
I think that he goes on and off.
Okay.
So let's wait.
Okay, well, I can answer a bit of it myself, in the sense that, there is a great deal of gray area around what is legal and not illegal in Cuba, and the question of piracy, and the Paquete really operates in that gray area for sure. And there is a level of sensitivity, though, as I was explaining before, when the project travels across other countries. And so Nestor was telling me, for instance, when they showcased the project in New York, they had to hire a lawyer, and only, it's coming. I'm just going to finish the sentence. But so they had to hire a lawyer, and only a portion of the art section could be displayed, not the entirety, for instance. But let's read what is writing. So in Cuba, not everything is legal or illegal. There is a concept of illegal businesses or action that are in a gray area and are accepted by the government, but not legal. Exactly.
Shinji was asking a specific question about the HTTP error 403. He's writing, for your area of research, what is the significance of an HTTP error 403 forbidden access? And is this type of error always associated with political questions?
Well, that's an interesting point and question, which I hope to further reflect upon, because also through this intervention for tonight, I guess it's worth going back to the different kind of blockage that Nestor was experiencing. And more generally, I did show that slide with a sort of collection of various errors I do encounter in my search. But I think that message, really, it does depend. They are quite specific and they mean different things as well. So it's also good to perhaps try to investigate the reasoning and, the rationale behind, those kind of interface when we encounter them. So, thank you so much.
We have a comment from Julia West, while there's also a reply on WhatsApp by Nestor while you're speaking. I think this infiltration also of the conversation through these different networks is a fantastic and perfect for this talk, fantastic addition. So Julia is saying there are two characteristics of the Paquete that allows it to flourish without significant state intervention, that it prohibits political content and pornography. Also, it serves a function for the state because it alleviates the burden of the lack of internet while also being contained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess this is more a comment, no?
Yes, I'm just reading them because
Yeah.
people in the live stream are not able to see the Zoom chat. So
True.
I think while WhatsApp will be visible, and I think everybody can see Nestor's comment.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, thank you, Julia. I think, yeah, it's really, it nicely sums up what I also try to explain, recounting a little bit the project.
Okay, so does anyone has any other question? Okay, sorry. What do you mean? This is Val, just writing now. What do you mean by it prohibits political content? I mean, everything can take on political connotation.
Who's this question for?
I don't know anymore. I'm getting lost.
I think it's for
No,
Julia.
Sorry, that's the Julia.
Yeah, it is for Julia, I guess.
So there's a conversation going in parallel here in the chat, and
Yes.
also across channels. Okay, I don't know if I should read what goes on in the chat or something more for like the participant in Zoom. But in the meantime, if someone has more question for Gaia or Nestor or also Julia, I guess, or for anyone, please feel free to post in the chat. If not, I think on this note, it's also a good time to wrap up. There's been like a lot of things that came out, and we've like traveled through so many different screens, geographical locations. We follow different journeys, and thank you so much, Gaia, for sharing all of these paradoxes too, and kind of raising so many important issues for photography institutions, for network cultures, and on a social, political, economic level, and artistic too.
Yeah, and also thank you to Nestor for being with us from Cuba and sending the recording video and sending it to us, and being there in WhatsApp to reply to the questions, as well as to everyone who has joined here on Zoom and on Twitch to this Skinwalk. Yeah, before we close, I just want to say that we will have the next Skinwalk in 2 weeks from now with Rohan Huret on the 1st of July, same time as always, 6 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. CT. And you are all invited to join again.
Make sure to download TeamViewer because Lauren will invite the participants to take over her computer, so it will be epic. All right, and as usual, now we end the stream here. Thanks everyone for joining on the live stream. Thanks for coming in Zoom.